Hey up everyone, welcome back to the History of Football channel. Today on the channel I'll be talking about another football and rivalry. I've done quite a few of these. Recently I did the South Coast Derby between Portsmouth and Southampton. Today's video is going to be the Tyne-Wear Derby, the history of that derby between Sunderland and Newcastle United. So I'm going to be talking about how it started, some of the big moments, and talk about the Tyne-Wear Derby in this video today, so stay tuned for the rest of the video. The Tyne-Wear Derby is a derby which predates football itself, with some instances dating back to the English Civil War, but one example is during the Jacobite Risings, Newcastle itself supported the Hanoverians with German King George, and Sunderland sided with the Scottish Stuarts. It's also a derby which has socio-economic and political ties to it as well. Sunderland themselves are the older of the two clubs. They were founded in 1879 as Sunderland and District Teachers, and they boast a proud history, having won the top division on 6 occasions. They've won the FA Cup twice, they've been runners-up in the League Cup twice, and they've also claimed the Charity Shield. Newcastle United were founded in 1881 as Stanley Football Club. In 1882 they changed their name to Newcastle East End Football Club, and in 1892 they became Newcastle United Football Club after the other club in the city, Newcastle West End, folded, leaving Newcastle East End the only club in Newcastle. They decided to rename themselves Newcastle United. The first competitive fixture between these two clubs occurred on the 10th of November 1888 in an FA Cup tie, where Sunderland would defeat Newcastle East End 2-0. In 1901 the two clubs would meet in what was described as the 1901 Good Friday encounter. The match had to be abandoned after 120,000 fans went onto the pitch at St James's Park, which at the time only had a capacity of 30,000 people. The news to abandon the match was met by anger and rioting followed, with a number of fans injured. On the 5th of December 1908, Sunderland would defeat Newcastle United 9-1 at St James's Park. Despite this, Newcastle would still win the league that year, finishing 9 points clear of Sunderland, who finished in 3rd place. This remains the biggest ever win in the Tyne-Wear Derby, and on top of that it's also Newcastle United's biggest ever home defeat, and also Sunderland's biggest ever win away from home over an opponent. Newcastle in some ways would get revenge over Sunderland for that defeat. In 1920 they defeated Sunderland 6-1, and also they defeated Sunderland 6-1 at Roker Park in 1955. In 1990, the two teams met in the 2nd Division playoff semi-final, which was described by the media as the biggest Tyne-Wear derby in history. Sunderland would win the two-legged semi-final playoff 2-0, scoring 2 goals at St James's Park in the return leg. Towards the end of the second leg, some Newcastle fans invaded the pitch in hope of forcing an abandonment. Sunderland would go on to lose the playoff final against Swindon Town, but were still promoted due to financial irregularities at Swindon. On the 25th of August 1999, the two clubs would meet in the Premier League, and Sunderland would win the match 2-1 at St James's Park. Before the match, Newcastle United manager Ruud Gillett had dropped Duncan Ferguson and Alan Shearer to the bench, which caused outrage amongst Newcastle United supporters. Gillett would resign as Newcastle United manager before the next match. The following year, Sunderland would repeat the same scoreline, with this time Thomas Sorensen of Sunderland saving a penalty from Alan Shearer. In 2006, Newcastle would come from a goal down at half-time to beat Sunderland 4-1 at the Stadium of Light. 2 years later, Sunderland would defeat Newcastle United 2-1 at home, recording their first Tyne-Wear Derby home win in 28 years. In 2010, Newcastle recorded one of their most famous victories over Sunderland, defeating them 5-1, with Kevin Nolan scoring a hat-trick, and on top of that, Newcastle United were down to 10 men for over 37 minutes. In 2013, Sunderland defeated Newcastle United 3-0 at St James's Park, and it was Paolo Di Canio's second game in charge as Sunderland manager. The result was also Sunderland's first away win in the fixture for 13 years. The following season saw Sunderland do the double over Newcastle for the first time since 1966-67 and win 3 derbies in a row for the first time since 1923. In December 2014, Sunderland's Adam Johnson scored a late penalty to ensure that Newcastle had lost 4 consecutive derbies against their fierce rivals. Following on from this, Sunderland would record 2 further derby victories over Newcastle to extend it to a 6th consecutive derby victory over Newcastle. It wasn't long after this that Sunderland's fortunes began to change, and by 2017 they were relegated from the Premier League, and in 2018 they were relegated to the 3rd tier of English football. The most recent meeting in the league between these two clubs happened on the 20th of March 2016 at St James's Park, which ended in a 1-1 draw, with Jermaine Defoe scoring the opening goal for Sunderland before Alexander Mitrovic equalised for Newcastle. On the 6th of January 2024, Sunderland faced Newcastle in the first derby of any kind since 2016. Newcastle won the match 3-0 and also secured their first away win over their rivals since 2011. After Sunderland upset Sheffield United in the Championship playoff final last season, Sunderland were promoted to the Premier League for the first time since 2017. The next scheduled meeting between these two rivals is on the 14th of December 2025, where Sunderland will host Newcastle United at the Stadium of Light. And it should be a very interesting Tyne-Wear derby, considering that a lot of people had Sunderland in the bottom 3 of the Premier League this year in their predictions, and at the moment they're in the top 6, they're playing well. Newcastle United haven't been playing as great as they'd like to be, and I think it's going to be a great matchup on the 14th of December. Looking at some all-time records in this derby, there's been 157 meetings in total. Newcastle's won 54 matches, Sunderland's won 53, and there's been 50 draws. The biggest ever attendance for a Tyne-Wear derby was in 1950, where 68,000 people attended Roker Park to watch Sunderland play out a 2-2 draw with Newcastle United. The lowest attendance in the Tyne-Wear derby was where Sunderland defeated Newcastle United 3-1 in 1893 at St James's Park, where 17,494 people attended. In terms of players that have played for both clubs, looking on a list, there's well over 70 players that have played for either Sunderland and Newcastle, so there's quite an extensive list. But in terms of managers, there's only 2 men that have taken charge of both teams. One of them is Sam Allardyce, and the other one is Steve Bruce, who was the Sunderland manager to begin with, and then in the summer of 2019 he became the Newcastle United manager, replacing Rafa Benitez. There is also a man by the name of Bob Stocko, who won the FA Cup as a player with Newcastle United in 1955, but then he became manager of Sunderland between 1972 and 1977, and he guided them to their FA Cup victory in 1973. Now, as fierce as this derby is, of course, you have to talk about the hooliganism and violence surrounding the derby. So, as I mentioned earlier in the video, there was that 1990 pitch invasion by Newcastle United supporters. In 2002, the Seaburn Casuals of Sunderland met with the Newcastle Gremlins for a pre-arranged clash near the North Shields ferry terminal, and that was described as some of the worst football-related violence ever witnessed in the United Kingdom. In 2008, after Sunderland beat Newcastle at home for the first time in 28 years, there was a pitch invasion by some Sunderland supporters and missiles were thrown at Newcastle United midfielder Joey Barton. In 2013, Newcastle United fans rioted after their team lost 3-0 to Sunderland at St James's Park, with one fan attacking a police horse, which gained international media attention. And sometimes it doesn't even require the two clubs to be playing against each other. In 2003, 95 fans were arrested after Sunderland and Newcastle fans clashed in Sunderland City Centre before an England UEFA Euro 2004 qualifying match against Turkey. So in terms of the Tyne-Wear derby, I think it's one of the most fierce derbies in the United Kingdom. I also think it's one of the most even ones as well, because as I alluded to earlier, I forgot to mention Newcastle United's honours, but Sunderland's won quite a few trophies in their history, but Newcastle United as well. They've won the top division 4 times. They've won the FA Cup 6 times. They've won the League Cup on 1 occasion. They've also won the Inner Cities Fairs Cup, which is the predecessor to the UEFA Cup. And you look at the honours between the two clubs, they've both won a lot of trophies. Head to head, they're very even. And it's a very, very fierce rivalry, and I should know that firsthand because I live close to Newcastle and Sunderland. And just on a personal note, I've known Newcastle United and Sunderland supporters in companies I've worked for, and some of them don't really talk to each other. They might keep it civil, but they don't really communicate or talk with each other. They're certainly not friends outside of work, I'll tell you that much. But this is my video on the Tyne-Wear derby. I hope you enjoyed this video, talking about the history of it, some of the big moments. If you enjoyed the video, give us a like and a comment. Let me know your favourite memories of the Tyne-Wear derby. If you're a Sunderland supporter, let me know, or a Newcastle United supporter. If I've left anything out, also let me know, because there's a lot of history to cover, and try to cram it all into a 11-12 minute video I think doesn't do it justice most of the time. But anyways, this has been History of Football. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch us all later in the next one. Alright, ta-ra for now.